Okay, I'm back. It's this, sorry guys, it's the connection. I've had new Wi-Fi installed because of this, and it's supposed to be the fastest and the most expensive, but I don't know what's going on. Anyway, let's get into this. So the internal Ramayana is a process which takes place internally, obviously. And one of in order to go through the entire Ramayana internally will take a lifetime. Giving it 20 minutes or 30 minutes in this presentation is only going to give you a very small flavor of the significance and spiritual genius of this epic. And let's not forget that the Ramayana is the oldest text known to mankind, but it is more than just a story. So, one of the questions that I was asked not too long ago was, is this mythology or is this actual real events? And I'll do a separate presentation on that. But internally, this particular scripture is written on three different levels, and I'm going to go through some of these things just now. But let's look at how this is written on three different levels. So every scripture that you will come across, and we're talking about the Ramayana here, is written on three different levels of interpretation, three different levels of understanding, and three different levels of spiritual evolution. Hold on, someone's messaging. Everyone. So at the top, we have the Adibatik. This is the story. This is the characters, the events, the way they interact. It's more or less the storyline. And underneath that, there is the Adidevik, which is the whole entire astral science. It's the process and the science of Kriya Yoga. And then underneath that is the Adi Atmic, which is the disciplined practice. So most people will know about the story. The Ramayana it's known all over the world globally. At some shape or form, we have come across it. And then underneath that, what a lot of people don't really understand and know is the astro yogic science. So when you start breaking down the character symbology in the events in the Sanskrit, you begin to see the Ramayana in a totally different dimension, in a totally different angle or level of consciousness. And when you go even more beyond that, you come to the actual practice. So today, most of this morning, I've spent a lot of time talking to Kriya Yoga students from all over India, and we're addressing various different parts of the discipline practice, the Kriya Yoga practice. And then what I do is teach also the astral science. So we look at it from a spiritual, scientific point of view of what this practice is doing internally to your brain, to your spine, and how that impacts you in the external world. So, what's happening on the outside with your dharam and your karam. So, the Ramayan, Rama inside you, this word Ramayan is a Sanskrit word, but if you look at Sanskrit from the point of view that it's actually spiritual codes, it's like a spiritual formula, then once you start breaking down this formula, you start seeing a totally different Ramayan. So Ramayan we know is a story, but when you go down deep into the Sanskrit word, the Ramayana is actually an internal process. So this process which is happening internally is what Bhagwan Valmiki took and he turned it into a story. What the rishis were very good at is taking very deep, esoteric, spiritual, and very advanced technology and knowledge and making a story out of it, putting music against it, putting color against it, putting a story against it, and making it into like a movie or a film or a serial that you can relate to, because the way our mind works is that it has to have an attachment, and when it's attached to a piece of music or a piece of art or color or some sort of external stimuli that excites the senses, then you have an attachment to it. Before then, you don't know anything about it. And um, when you're trying to explain deep esoteric spiritual knowledge, it becomes very, very difficult. We're lucky to be in the day and age that we are in today because we have scientific research coming out of the West from MIT, Harvard, Oxford, etc., that are actually backing up a lot of the claims that the Vedas have declared, such as the human body is actually just a vehicle through which the soul is used to ultimately attain self-realization. So how it happens is, if you look at this slide, um, the Ramayana starts off at the Agna Chakra. The Agna Chakra, or the center of consciousness, is known as Ayodhya. And the word Ayodhya is two words, A and Yod. Yod means to battle, and Ayod means to not battle. It brings equilibrium, it brings stability. Now that part of the body, the prefrontal lobe, is the point just above the eyebrows, and that is known as the CEO part of the brain. That is where you make human decisions, not emotional or irrational decisions, which really comes from the monkey part of the brain, the lymphic system. And as you go down these various chakras or centers of consciousness, they relate to individual khandas of the Ramayana. So whatever's happening in a story level in that particular chapter or khanda can be related to that particular center of consciousness. And everything that happens in the Ramayana is actually the whole interplay of astral energies, very subtle energies like consciousness, and likes and desires and feelings and emotions. All of this happens on the brain and the spine. That is why the brain and the spine is known as the real yajna. So when you practice Kriya Yoga, what you're doing is offering the breath as the oil that you would put into when you're doing a havan. Rather than the oil, what you're doing is using the breath to ignite internally what you're doing externally when you're doing a havan, for example. Kriya Yoga, which the Ramayana is the whole entire process of, does that internally. And if you take up the courses or the lessons and you start practicing internal Kriya Pranayama or the kind of softer techniques of Pranayama, Kriya Pranayama, you'll see how that actually works. So, like I said, the Ramayana is an internal journey. It's something that happens internally. And when you break the word Ramayan down, it no longer is just one word, it's actually three words, Ra, Ma, and Yana. And when you look at each individual Sanskrit word, Ra, Ma, and Yana, there's a totally different meaning behind it. So Ma represents the second law of thermodynamics. It's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. It's the three, well, I can say the three most famous gods that most people around the world know. Certainly within the Western world, in the UK, a lot of people, they can relate to Shiva, but what they don't know is that Shiva is part of this Ma, which is the third process in the second law of thermodynamics. Something is created, it then operates for a certain period of time, Vishnu, and then goes into dissolution and into the next cycle, which is Shiva. Ra represents the absence of carnal desires, which is sexual desires, the absence of heat. And when you look at it from that point of view, Ramayan then becomes the internal journey of the soul rather than the most kind of commonly known interpretation of it is the journey of Ram. Yes, it is the journey of Ram, but when you look at the word Ram itself and who Ram represents in the story of the Ramayan, he is that internal, universal consciousness. So in the course that Remind Decoded teach, we talk about how you can expand your consciousness. What we're really saying there is how you can use techniques like dharana technique of meditation to make your mind more focused internally so that you expand your awareness, your arama conscious internally as well as externally by withdrawing your mind from the surface of the body and your mind. So I went through some of this in one of the lessons that I was doing with a Kriya Yoga student earlier on, about how creation started. And the Ramayana relates to Vivasvat or the Surya Vansh because it is the seventh cycle of creation or the seventh Manu. Vivasvat represents or means light that shines forth. That light is the internal light of the spiritual eye, which again, you can start seeing flashes of the spiritual eye in the Kriya Yoga courses that I teach through a technique called Yoni Mudra or Jyoti Mudra. And your internal Rama consciousness emerges from this singular point of energy, of this desireless desire spirit, which the Vedas call Parma Brahm. But when this Parma Brahm's energy or soul, or this energy that it throws out because it's experiencing Satchitanand and it wants everything around it to experience bliss as well, at the same time it wants that Satchitanand to come back into this one singular source, and instantly you create duality. But when that particular energy comes under the influence of chit or feeling, then your Rama consciousness, your internal real consciousness, your universal consciousness comes under this experience of that I am the believer. Because when you put intelligence and feelings together, most people who are intelligent can also be very emotional when they're trying to get their point across or arguing, and all of a sudden, I am right, not you. What happens here is this: it activates this whole experience of existence that I'm experiencing this. I am separate for every other soul out there. And then what divides us even further is this concept of Maya. And Maya says that there are four component parts of it. There's time, there is space, there is atom, and then there is sound, the sound of Om. Now, a lot of people have questioned me on that and said, well, how can sound be part of Maya? Don't have the time to go through that today. We could do that in a different presentation. So what happens then is Maya, this cosmic delusion, deludes the soul internally. And Ravan or Dasana, which is the opposite of Dasarat, is now operating your consciousness from manas or the blind sense mind rather than from buddhi, which is represented by Dasarat. So Dasarata is Dasa, 10, Rata, chariot. Dasarat is anyone who has a kingdom, Kosala, your brain, and your brain, if you look at the prefrontal lobe, the point between the eyebrows, is Ayodhya. That's his capital of his kingdom. Dasarat is anyone who has control over the five karmindriyas and the five indriyas from the consciousness of buddhi, because your mind is sitting on buddhi. Then you have control, then you're in samadhi. But when it's operating from dasana or from Ravan, from the Muladhara chakra, the lowest state of consciousness, which is involved in mundane survival of the human race, then your senses are also out of control as well. They're no longer Dasarat, they are Dasana. Hence the reason why in the story of the Ramayana, you see Ravan is explained as someone who has 10 heads. That's where the 10 heads, that's the symbolization of the 10 heads. And then eventually what happens is your soul Ram becomes locked within the spine, and your spine has its peripheral nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system takes in information through your senses and then sends those electrical signals up to your brain and your central nervous system. And then depending on where your consciousness and your mind is sitting, is it with manas, is it with buddhi, you create a version of reality around you based on your experiences. And this is why the concept of dharma is so confused, because if you look at each individual as a separate entity or a separate universe, in their universe, what they're doing is right, what they're doing is wrong. But that does not necessarily mean that what they're doing is also right for you, because you ultimately are separate from those experiences. And Dharma says that Dharma is any thought or action which goes with the flow of creation, which goes with the purpose of creation. And the purpose of creation was always for the soul, as in your internal Ram consciousness, to go back to its one singular source. So when you or anybody around you prevents somebody from developing in a humane and spiritual way, that is actually known as adharam, because what you're doing is preventing that individual soul from fulfilling its ultimate goal, ultimate purpose in life, which is for self-realization and ultimately God realization. And the Ramayana is self-realization, and then the story of Love Kush is God realization. Two very big differences. The Ramayana is samadhi. The story of Love Kush and what happens after that is nirvikalpa samadhi. So we kind of alluded to this a little bit with regards to breaking the Shiv Dhanush. This is a very kind of, you need to have a little bit of knowledge around the structure of the brain and an interest within kind of physiology and the human anatomy. But basically the Shiv Dhanush is, it represents the medulla oblongata in the brain, which is the point behind, just at the back there, as you'll see from the diagram there. That's known as the gateway of God. So when Ram breaks the Shiv Dhanush, Ram representing consciousness, Sita representing Kundalini, that is when your soul from the astral world takes its seat. It jumps into the first cell in the mother's womb. That is the symbology behind breaking the Shiva Dhanush at a very spiritual level. What happens is your soul has this desire because of its karam, because of its samsaras and samskaras. We went through that in the Yog Vishesh Decoded presentation. If you haven't seen it, it is on our YouTube channel. When your soul jumps into that cell, that is when the Ramayana starts for you. It becomes an internal battle. Sita, the Kundalini, creates the brain, creates the spine, and everything, all the tissues and organs around it. And your soul, Ram consciousness, begins to think to itself, what have I done? I could have developed further to realize myself as pure spirit, but now I'm locked back into this Maya. I'm locked back into this world where I now have to go through all this karma again. I have to go and fulfill this desire. I need to go and fulfill that desire. And all of a sudden you become part of the jungle, the internal jungle, the spine and the brain. And that is where your consciousness is locked. What you need to do through the practice of Kriya Yoga meditation is lift that consciousness from the surface of the body and the mind and reverse that energy back up the spine, back up the Shushamna, through the various chakras or centers of consciousness, and hold your consciousness at the point between the eyebrows, known as in the Vedas, Kutasa Katayani, or universal consciousness or Ram consciousness. So when Ram and Sita return back from 14 years of exile, what that actually means is samadhi. That is why it's known as the Festival of Lights, because that is when you will see the internal light of the soul. Now, Hanuman is a very, very big character in the Ramayana. He is the biggest character in the Ramayana. And when you look at Hanuman from the point of view of a spiritual interpretation, he represents pranayama. Pranayama is very much confused with breath control. It's not breath control, and it's very difficult to understand this, but the breath is connected to life force or pran energy. But pranayama is not controlling the breath, it's controlling life energy. There's a very big difference between it, but a very subtle difference at the same time. Hanuman is the victory, is the practice of Hanuman or pranayama is what takes your soul and what took Ram in the story of the Ramayana to victory. And through the practice of pranayama, which is one of the first techniques that I teach, known as the dharana concentration technique in the courses, you're actually practicing pranayama, you're actually practicing the Hanuman in the Ramayana when you're practicing pranayama. Hanuman represents the Anahata chakra, which is at the heart. Hold on, there are some people messaging me. I'm going to look at this message. This will be up on YouTube for you to see. And if it's not coming out clearly, I'll record this later on and put it back up again. But anyway, for the time being, we don't have long left on Zoom for this, maybe another 5 minutes. So I'm going to do this for 5 minutes and give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions. Hanuman represents the whole practice of pranayama, and pranayama is related to your mind. So if you think of two other characters in the Ramayana, Sugriv and Bali, Bali and Bali represents the Apan, which is the breath, a Pacific life force, and Sugriv represents Pran, which is the cool energy or the cooler sensation of breath, which is again another Pacific life energy. When these two Pacific life force energies are moved up and down the Shushumna through the practice of pranayama, what happens is there are 49 other life force energies, and there's one that overlooks all of them, the universal pran. When you start neutralizing the pran and the apan through the practice of pranayama, you bring all the other vayus, the other Pacific life force energies, into synchronization until there is complete stoppage or cessation of breath. When you do that consciously, you go into samadhi. That is when you go into samadhi. That is when you go into ayodhya. That is when you have lifted your Ram consciousness and the Sita Kundalini sitting at the Muladhara chakra all the way up through the Shushumna back into the point between the eyebrows. And Lakshman is also a very important character because without concentration, you cannot achieve anything in life, in your material life, or in your spiritual life. Because if you don't concentrate on a particular task, you won't be able to focus and get on with it. If you don't have a super level of concentration through the practice of dharana meditation or concentration technique, the other kriya techniques such as Mahamudra or Navi Kriya, Talabhya Kriya, Kacheri Mudra, Yoni Mudra, all of these techniques, Kriya Pranayama, internal, and the kind of softer technique as well, none of them will give you any spiritual benefits. They might give you something, but it won't give you the full effect of that spiritual benefit. Likewise, when you are concentrating on something in the external world and you're focusing your energy on that, that's Lakshman. Lakshman. When you're focusing on that, you're putting your energy into that. And when you're putting your energy into that, you start seeing the benefits of it. Concentration levels vary from person to person. Some people are born with very high levels of concentration. Other people, like myself, I've had to train myself to concentrate on very specific tasks. And how you do that, again, we have these energization techniques, which have actually come down from Paramahansa Yogananda, a combination of Hatha Yoga and other kind of advanced Kriya techniques, which he's put together as a way of developing three things: developing your body to become more supple and energized, also developing willpower. We go through willpower in the first course about what willpower actually is. It's mechanical and conscious willpower. But more importantly, I think for a lot of people, it's about concentration as well. Because what you're really doing is concentrating your thoughts on particular parts of the body and energizing them. And when you start doing that, you start developing your willpower. So I hope you can start seeing now how this is all kind of fitting in as an internal Ramayana. And has anybody got any questions for me at all? You can unmute yourself if you've got a question, or send it to me on chat. Okay, I'm not getting any questions from anyone. So hold on, there's someone. Hanuman does mean to kill the mind, but ultimately it's when you take up the techniques And if you take up the course, and there's no cost associated to the course, by the way, it's whatever donation you want to give. It's not really killing the mind, because you can't really kill the mind. What you do is you dissolve the mind within the mind. That is Manosarovar. That is Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But up until that point, your mind is the most powerful tool that you have. Your mind is connected to your breath. So if you think about when you've ever been angry, your breath is sharper and it's shorter, just like Bali was as a character within the Ramayana. And if when you're more cool, calm, and collective, perhaps after practicing, meditation for half an hour or so, your breath is a lot deeper and a lot longer. So that's basically connected to the mind. And then depending on how your breath is, that's how your mind will also act. It can either be a monkey mind or it can be more stable. And what you need to do is start having more self-awareness of the mind and start having more control over the mind. Once you start doing that, then you start having more control over destiny. To cover any of the older webinars, I'm uploading them onto our YouTube channel, and you just need to subscribe to it and you'll get the updates as and when they come. I will keep doing these sessions. They are only half an hour, and the best way to help Remind Decoded and for you to learn so much from me as well and from Remind Decoded is to take up the course. Like I said, it's donation only. I can send you the link to make that donation, whatever that is of your choice, and then you get access to all the courses. Part of the reason of why I can't just give techniques like that out for free is because they're very advanced and very sacred, and only for people that are really dead serious about it. And we have to comply to that. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I will upload this onto YouTube, and I'll let you know when the next ones are coming. Thanks. Bye.